Secretary Clinton, thank you so much for being here today of all days. You've been more vocal in your criticism of the president lately, calling him a corrupt human tornado and an illegitimate president. Can you tell me about how you got there?
Well, I think we've all known for a long time that he was a corrupt businessman who cheated people. And we've known that he and his campaign invited help in the last election from the Russians. And we've known that he has been just insulting people and attacking people throughout his presidency. Yeah. But what's become absolutely clear now is that he has used the office of the presidency to further his own personal and political interests over and above, even sometimes against the best interests of the United States and our national security. Right. So this is a moment when people need to speak out. And as a former Secretary of State who traveled to 112 countries in 4 years, I know how important it is that leaders be held accountable for actions that really do raise serious questions about whose side they're on. And it appears that he's on his side, not America's side.
So when we're going forward with impeachment, it is a national crisis. And you're being dragged back into the national conversation once again. How many walks in the woods have you taken in the last month?
You know, it's important to just take a minute to realize that this president thrives on distraction and diversion and confusion, and he projects onto other people what he himself has done. So when he starts going after me and other people, it shows his desperation to change the subject, to try to drag other people into what is clearly a serious attempt to hold him accountable. So I'm no longer surprised by it. I have come to expect it, but I'm hoping that this time the American public and the press understand what game he's playing.
Now, there are only now 4 presidents in all of American history who have been through impeachment proceedings, and you've had connections to 3 of them.
That's right.
Perhaps there's nobody more uniquely qualified to speak to this process than you. So how would you describe the gravity of what America's going through right now?
This should always be a last resort. No one should be celebrating or applauding an opening of an impeachment inquiry. As you rightly say, I served on the impeachment inquiry staff of the House Judiciary Committee back in 1974 when the president was Richard Nixon. We pursued our work with the utmost gravity. The leaders of our efforts, both in Congress and on the impeachment inquiry staff, were totally focused on evidence, evidence, evidence. You know, don't get ahead of it. Don't get political, don't get partisan, stay focused on the evidence, because this is a very serious inquiry that may or may not lead to impeachment, depending upon what the evidence shows. So I was one of the young lawyers who helped to draft the memo about what are high crimes and misdemeanors. Ironically or coincidentally, Bill Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts,
now running against Trump,
who's running against Trump, was on the Republican staff. It was a bipartisan effort. I think we all felt a sense of duty to country, and we would go, as I said, where the evidence led. So that was my experience with a very thorough, thoughtful, deliberative process. Obviously, I lived through what happened in the late 90s, which was could not have been more different, and unfortunately, the effort was nothing but a partisan pursuit, and the American people saw through it. And
Republicans tried to use your own words against you then.
Oh yeah, of course, but they really couldn't, because a high crime and misdemeanor is something that is undertaken against the security and the integrity of the state. It is misusing the office for political or personal purposes. It is refusing to cooperate with Congress, the kinds of charges that were brought against President Nixon. So this new opening of an impeachment inquiry is being done with the same sober approach that I remember from 1974. Okay. And I think that the Speaker, as we all know, did not rush into this.
Right. She took her time.
She was very cautious because it's such a serious undertaking. And now that it's underway, it is focused on the evidence about President Trump's efforts to once again use foreign influence to impact our election. You would have thought he learned something, but he got away with it. And he's the kind of guy who, if you get away with something, hey, you know, they couldn't prove it, even though he called for interference publicly. They couldn't prove it, so let's go do it again. And that's what set off the alarm bells.
It was interesting to me that his call with Zelensky was the day after Mueller testified before Congress.
You are so right.
Yeah.
And look, I served with Bob Mueller. I was Secretary of State in the Senate while he was serving as FBI director. I mean, the poor man became FBI director like a week before 9/11. So as a senator from New York, you know, we were very focused on the security of New York and obviously our country. And I know what a man of integrity and just professionalism he is. And so if you read his report, which of course a lot of people refused to do or tried to minimize, he could not have been clearer that there was a lot of involvement of the Russians, and he has big indictments against a bunch of Russians who influenced and affected the outcome of the election, and then the obstruction of justice. So for Trump to think that he'd been somehow let off the hook or vindicated was really an unfortunate conclusion, because I don't think you could have been clearer in the Mueller report to basically say, under our rules, you can't indict a sitting president. And I think it was a very apt conclusion from that. If we could, we would.
Right.
So therefore, Congress, it's in your
it's
in your jurisdiction.
Yeah. So let's talk about Trump's call with the president of Ukraine. When you read the call summary and you read the whistleblower complaint, what stood out to you?
Several things stood out to me. I mean, I have been the maker of such calls. I've been the observer and the listener on such calls. I've read countless reports of such calls. And there is no doubt that this was an effort, number one, to extract a quid pro quo. We're holding up your military aid, despite the fact that Russia has occupied a part of your country and are still engaged in active warfare against your government. So it was definitely a quid pro quo. It was an attempt to call it a bribery, call it extortion, to really heavily pressure the new president, just elected, of Ukraine. That if you want help protecting your country, I have a favor to ask. And I don't see how anybody could read that. And remember, this is not hearsay. This is the White House's memo about the call. It's not an exact transcript, but it is a very faithful rendering approved by the White House, which obviously means approved by the president, who didn't see anything wrong with it.
They released it.
They released it. So when I hear some of my former Republican colleagues saying, well, it's hearsay. No, it is an admission by the president, because this is an official document from the White House. Perhaps even more concerning is the whistleblower complaint, which goes into great detail about how immediately, upon hearing what the president was saying to the Ukrainian president, people in the Situation Room knew they had a problem. And they did what apparently they had done before, which is to try to bury the report of that call in a highly classified system that is supposed to be used for the most serious secrets of our government, like the Osama bin Laden raid. And there's nothing in the whistleblower complaint or in the memo from the White House that says there is such highly classified information. Their concern was, oh my gosh, it's not only embarrassing to see the president playing the heavy and threatening the president of Ukraine, it could be illegal. It certainly could be an impeachable offense. So I think that when Speaker Pelosi saw that, and she has years on the Intelligence Committee, she is used to being briefed about the most sacred secrets of our country. She's used to reading intelligence. When she saw that, she had the same reaction I did, which is, whoa, this is wrong. And it is a clear indication that Trump only cares about himself, his own reelection, could care less about America's national security, which I happen to think is implicated in Ukrainian national security because Vladimir Putin is on the march, and that affects us as well as the Ukrainians.
He also seems to really care about conspiracy theories.
Yes,
so
he
what was your
does.
reaction when you saw him ask the president of Ukraine if your emails were in Ukraine?
You know, I live rent-free in his head, so I'm never surprised when I pop out of his head on a Twitter feed or in some other way.
I mean, but 3 years later on this call.
Well, but he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows what the Russians did for him. He knows what Cambridge Analytica did for him. He knows all the games that were played with voter suppression and the hacking and weaponization of information. He knows it. Even if people don't want to admit it who are around him or voted for him, he knows that there were many, many problems with his election, and he is not a legitimately elected president. So he is constantly trying to come up with some conspiracy theory to justify his election. And now his latest is that somehow Democrats, including me, were in cahoots with, you know, the Ukrainian government. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I was struck today in the news that one of the former employees in the Trump White House who worked on the National Security Council, who was an experienced handler of information, said we tried so hard to disabuse him of these crazy conspiracy theories about Ukraine and all the rest of it. But he believes what he wants to believe, and he has great confidence in himself to tell a false story and convince people of it. And it worked for him in business, and he went bankrupt, but he would bounce back, and he would tell more crazy stories, and it worked for him when he ran for president. So he's not going to stop. And that's what's so dangerous, because here's why people who are still questioning whether or not we should have an impeachment inquiry should ask themselves, we have seen this man will do anything. Even if you thought it was entertaining or amusing or shocking that he would say or do anything, what does a desperate, cornered man who will say or do anything do with the power that he currently has? And we should all be worried about what he might do that would endanger Americans, American lives, American security. And that's why this impeachment inquiry is so critically important.
I mean, speaking of a cornered man, so this weekend he tweeted that there's going to be a civil war if he's impeached.
Well, that's why he has to be held accountable, because, you know, during his campaign, he would say things like, well, my Second Amendment friends are going to take care of Hillary Clinton. He would say threatening things. He would say outrageous things. And everybody thought, oh, that's just who he is. It's kind of, you know, it's just sort of part of his whole shtick, right? Well, we've seen him in action now. And we've seen how he riles people up. He plays to some of the worst instincts and the deepest fears that people have. And so when he says something like that, it is a signal. It's a signal about how far he's willing to go, how he is sending a message to his most ardent supporters. And I find it deeply frightening and disturbing to have a president of the United States saying these things. You know, words have a way of influencing actions. And he knows that he's got people out there, we've seen it, who were influenced by him and picked up an automatic weapon and killed people. We've seen people who were influenced by him who attacked synagogues or mosques or places of, you know, worship and gathering. And I don't know what to do other than to continue to speak out. You know, people say to me sometimes, oh, come on, you know, you've done your time. You don't need to keep doing that. I'm an American. I have served my country. I have been raised to love my country. I've agreed and disagreed with presidents of my own party as well as the other party over many years. But this is different. This is not the usual, well, you know, you don't agree with him, therefore you're saying this. No. He has gone beyond any bounds of appropriate presidential behavior. And we're not sure what he might do. And these kinds of incitements that he's engaged in should disturb any American. I don't care what party you're a member of or no party. You should be disturbed.
Yeah. So there's the incitement, there's the disinformation. You yourself were a target of that disinformation in 2016. And I think you've written that Trump knows the political press well. If he gives them a new rabbit to chase every day, they'll never catch any of them.
Right.
I think we're seeing that again.
Right.
So what can the media and Democrats do to sort of get this right in 2020? What's the right strategy?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I think the press has a very hard time covering someone who is a master at diversion. Yes. And he throws so much into the public arena in what he says, what he tweets, what he does, that it's hard to keep an eye on the story.
Right.
But there is now a story. It's a story of someone who has abused his office, who has enriched himself and his family while being in office, someone who has defied congressional requests, judicial orders, someone who has removed people who in any way question him and replaced them with those who are willing to do his bidding. So the press needs to stay focused on that and the consequences. And it's something that is hard to do in our short attention span world, and how, you know, subjects are just constantly changing. And the Democrats have to do their best job as well. So my advice to the Democrats is, number one, let the impeachment inquiry proceed with professional legal help and analysis. And there needs to be a reporting out to the American public, but don't, you know, be constantly leaking and talking until you know what the evidence is. Right. Because that's what, you know, I learned back in '74. And I think there will be a fight over the evidence. How will the impeachment inquiry get a hold of that server that has information on it?
Exactly. And other calls on it.
And other calls on it. And today, you know, Vladimir Putin basically said that, you know, the United States can't release a conversation with him without his permission. Who the heck does he think he is, if that doesn't wake up people? Yeah. So if he is saying that, we know that some of the conversations between Trump and Putin that we could only guess at before, because when he met with Putin, wouldn't have note takers in the room, and there were no reports out.
We still don't have that interpreter's notes.
We
still don't know what happened.
We don't know what
meeting.
happened at all. Yeah. And so people need to know that, because what's he giving away in return for what? We know that, you know, they kept working on the Trump Tower deal all the way up till the election. What else is going on?
Right. And everything we've seen in public, what is worse that they're hiding?
Right. So let the impeachment staff do its job and have a well-organized effort to tell the story appropriately. But let the Democrats also talk about everything they've passed. You know, part of Trump's and Mitch McConnell's game is to make people feel like, okay, we voted for a Democratic House, nothing changed. Right. Well, the reason nothing changed is it goes to the Senate to die. Yes. And I think that Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats need to say, here's how your life would have been better with the health care and prescription drug legislation we passed. Here's how you would be safer with the gun legislation we passed that is supported by the vast majority of Americans. Here's how we can give you, you know, a real reassurance that we're going to tackle and do something about making sure our elections are clean, fair, transparent, and accurate. So the Democrats have passed really important reform legislation, but nobody knows because they pass it. They have a press conference about it, and then, you know, they send it to the Senate. Mitch McConnell swears he's never going to bring it up. That should be a constant drumbeat as well, because I want the American people to know, look, the Democratic House is doing your work. It is making a difference. And the Democratic House is engaged in this very serious constitutional responsibility to begin an impeachment inquiry. And I think most Americans can understand that.
As we get to the end here, I just want to get your reaction to one of these diversionary tactics. There's a new report that the State Department has, quote, intensified a probe of emails sent to you, and that they're retroactively recategorized them as classified. Yeah. What was your reaction when you saw that?
You know, my reaction is, as you might predict, absolute bewilderment. And disappointment. My understanding from press coverage is that they are talking to 130 people, or give or take.
Right.
These people are experienced Foreign Service officers, other distinguished Americans who've had great careers. What does it mean to retroactively classify something they sent?
Right.
It's a witch hunt, and it's a real one, unlike the kind of things that Trump, talks about. And it is meant, again, to try to raise the specter, which worked for them, about my emails, which were investigated endlessly, and people, had to conclude there was nothing wrong.
Right.
I'm
sorry
that they're doing it again, because now they're trying to, bring in other people.
Yeah.
And, I read something in the paper today describing it, saying, it's like you were driving in a 70-mile lane and they had cameras, so they were taking pictures of your license plates. And then a year later, they decided they needed to, drop the speed limit down to 65. So now they're going to send tickets to everybody who drove 70 when the speed limit was 70. This is crazy, but it's crazy like a fox, because, if the Republicans and Trump and his supporters in the media can muddy the waters and raise all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories, then maybe people won't pay attention to the danger he poses to our country. He poses a clear and present danger to the United States. And his love affair with all of these authoritarian dictators like Putin and others should be concerning to anybody, because basically he is saying, that's who I want to be. That's how I want to govern. And I want to cut deals with people who are not Democrats in the small d sense of it and don't care about the United States and our security.
Yeah. Just one more reaction I want to get from you. You've known Rudy Giuliani for many years. What do you make of what he's doing now?
I don't understand what he's doing. I think he has gone over the edge on his behavior.
Yeah.
And I ran against him in 2000, so I don't know him that well.
Yeah.
And he quit before the election. But I've watched him, and he just seems to be totally enthralled to these conspiracies that he promotes. And this man who worked in the White House said that he thinks the primary person who is always spinning up Trump is Giuliani.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? I don't understand that.
All right, here's my final question for you. Regarding impeachment, Pelosi said this is a sad day for America. Given the barrage of news and all of the titles that you hold, these days, where do you find hope?
I find hope in everything that Americans are doing to not only resist this abusive president and his allies, but to stand up for marginalized people, whether it's children in cages on the border, or people who are of the Muslim faith who are being, demonized by this president. So I find a lot of hope in the way Americans have rallied to stand up for our most fundamental rights. They're real patriots. Yeah. I also have a lot of hope in young people. I mean, I think that, a lot of the young people that work for me, that I get to, know, or that I have some association with, it's not easy, but they are determined to find a new way of communicating, a new way of starting a business, a new way of making a difference in the world. And this latest effort on climate change, led by that remarkable 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who's in our book, the Book of Gutsy Women, standing up and speaking truth to power, I get a lot of hope from that.
Yeah. That's great. Secretary Clinton, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. I could ask you so many more questions.
I know.
But
We'll
I
have
know
to do
you
it
have